Can you challenge a judge's decision in court?
Objection!
Or even the medical examination from your doctor in a workers' compensation case?
Objection!
Today's episode is going to be very interesting, and it has to do with second opinions in the world of workers' compensation, because there is second opinions in different aspects of a workers' comp claim. Welcome to Work Comp Talk, a podcast dedicated to all of the injured workers here in the state of California. It's where you get informed, where you get educated, where you learn strategies, and where you learn everything that you need to know about the California workers' comp system. My name is Carmen, your host, and joining me today is Bilal Kassem. Welcome, Bilal. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Carmen.
So therefore, Bilal, what exactly is a second opinion in the context of the workers' comp system?
When we talk about second opinions, I think it can be broadly applied to a lot of things in workers' comp, whether you're talking about whether you disagree with your treating physician, whether you disagree with a QME or AME in your case, which are medical legal evaluators, or whether you disagree with what the judge has to say.
Ooh, wait. That was juicy. The judge?
Yeah, what you said is true. Are there opportunities for you to disagree and challenge something that's happening in your workers' comp case? So I think all those things happen. Probably the most common is like what happens when you disagree with what your doctor has to say. A lot of people are first put with a doctor that they're not really happy with, and maybe that doctor's more insurance oriented, or they're not listening to them. They have a weird bedside manner. There's a variety of reasons why someone may not like their doctor, and the question is like, what do I do with this guy? Do I have to listen to everything they say and that's that? Or do I have opportunities to go somewhere else and seek a second opinion?
Right, because that's a solid question. There are rules within the workers' comp system that, one, some people believe you can't ever change a doctor, right? And two, that you have to listen to what this doctor and be treated the way this doctor treats you. But there's options. There are second chances.
There are. Generally, you get one treating doctor in a workers' comp case for one type of injury or system. If you have multiple issues going on, like internal medicine or psych and orthopedics, you can have a couple different doctors, but you can challenge your doctor's opinion. The most common is to either change your treating physician entirely, meaning you're just not going to go any further with your first doctor and you want to go to someone new and different. Or maybe you're okay with your doctor, but their answer is not too confidence inspiring. When you ask them, hey, do I need surgery? And they're like, well, you might get better, you might not. I don't know. We could always, chop your arm off and see if it feels good or not, if you get the relief you're looking for. So people they don't dislike their doctor, but at the same time, they want to vet what their doctor's saying, especially if it's something that's like a major surgery that's potentially going to be life-changing. They want to go to a different doctor to see, hey, is this doctor saying the same thing as the first doctor? And that's something that you're allowed to do in workers' compensation.
So what does that look like? If I do want to change a doctor, like how does the system handle this dispute of not agreeing with my physical doctor? What are my options?
It depends on what's leading to that disagreement in the first place. If, for example, your doctor says, look, you just don't need any more care. You don't need to see a doctor anymore. You're fine. Go back to work. You're done. No more doctors. You can't elect to see a new treating physician because the insurance company is going to object and say, look, your doctor said you don't need any more treatment, so you have no need for a new treating physician, in which case you have to go the medical legal route, which is qualified medical evaluator or an agreed medical evaluator if you have an attorney. But if your doctor has said that you still need treatment, you still need care, maybe you just disagree with their recommendations, you disagree with their method of treatment, you disagree with work restrictions that are being provided, things like that, then you can elect a new treating physician, change in treating physician, which you're allowed to do. And that's a process by which you look at the medical provider network, if there is one, and you submit a request for authorization for change in treating physician to the insurance company, and then they should be issuing authorization for your new doctor to take over care. And so that's basically the process.
You mentioned the MPN list, the medical provider network list. What role does this list take in the second opinion process?
If you have a valid medical provider network, as an injured worker, you're limited to treating within that medical provider network. Meaning, if you don't like your treating physician that was initially assigned in the case, you don't get to go to your own personal doctor to the second opinion. You have to work within that network to choose another doctor. So your options may be limited.
Got it. You mentioned earlier about the qualified medical evaluators. Is there and can there be a confusion confusion between someone thinking, okay, there is a difference between an internal second opinion versus requesting a QME? Are there two different avenues based on the QME and based on changing your doctor in general, your treating physician?
Yeah, definitely. In some sense, a lot of times the QME is kind of the most important doctor in a case because they're the ones that largely decide your disability status, your permanent disability ratings. It's not to say treating doctors don't do those things. Treating doctors do those things, although less common and less thorough, I think, because the QME's entire job is to do those things. But when you're going to a QME, it's because you're disagreeing with your treating physician. You can disagree with your treating physician also by changing to a different doctor. But if you're in a circumstance where you can't make that change, either because you've been released from care with no future medical care, or because the treating doctors that you go to aren't willing to write the right reports or do things in the right way to assist you in what you need, you have to go to a qualified medical evaluator. But when you're going to trial on a case, oftentimes we're battling over whose report is a better report. Is it the treating physician or is it the QME? And so a lot of times, either because of unavailability or limited resources, you don't get a good primary treating physician that can do the same thing that a good QME can in terms of guiding your case in the right direction.
Right. With that in mind, that you're able to kind of change doctors as a primary treating physician and seek for a qualified medical evaluator to kind of oversee some of the things that you may disagree with your treating physician. How many times can you change treating physicians, and would you recommend it?
This comes up a lot. The industry term we'd use is doctor shopping a lot of times, where people struggle with accepting their circumstance. And I think people do have a tendency to want to go to a doctor that's going to validate what they're going through. And that's fine. At some point, though, when enough doctors are saying the same thing, you kind of have to accept what the doctors are saying. You can't just doctor after doctor after doctor hoping that the answer will be different. And that's not to say that, a patient's never right and a doctor is always right, because a lot of times we do see cases where clients have disagreed with what their doctors have said and the doctors just really haven't dug in deep enough to have that meaningful relationship and giving that patient meaningful amount of their time and attention to really figure out what's going on. But you have to work within the confines of the system. And the more you switch doctors, the more likely it is that the next doctor is not going to take you as a patient. We see it all too often where there's too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Once too many people have been involved in the case, no one wants to touch the case anymore because it's too complex, too much has happened. There's not a substantial medical record that makes the doctor feel confident in taking over care. So there's a lot of reasons why a lot of doctors won't actually take on a case if a person has changed too often. And also too, just for you as an injured worker, if you're constantly changing doctors, it can interrupt things like temporary disability benefits. If you change doctors, for example, after surgery has been approved, the new doctor you go to may not necessarily want to do the approved surgery that your last doctor was going to do for you, and things like that. So it can certainly complicate the case for you. It can complicate the case for the doctors as well. So I truly don't recommend that people make too many changes with their treating physician if they can help it.
I hear you. Now, let's say that you do end up changing doctors at least once. What happens if that opinion of that new doctor is completely different and they're total opposites? What happens in that case, in that scenario?
I guess it depends on whether it's for your benefit or the insurance company's benefit. You have one treating physician. And so if your new treating physician is recommending something, the technically correct way to challenge that doctor's opinion would be to go to a qualified medical evaluator. So if your old doctor had said that you're permanent and stationary, but your new doctor says that you're actually temporarily totally disabled, there's only one treating physician at the time who's saying that you're temporarily totally disabled at this present time. So if the insurance company wanted to challenge that opinion, they would really need to go to a qualified medical evaluator to say, hey, was this person actually permanent stationary, like a last treating physician said, or are they actually temporarily totally disabled now? So you would go to a QME to resolve those kinds of disputes.
Got it. So then obviously the QME would carry more weight versus what your current treating doctor.
It depends.
If it sided more with you, right? And not with the insurance company.
Yeah, when we're talking about which report's more favorable, we're really talking about just how thorough the report is. If your primary treating physician writes a report that's like one sentence long and it's scribbled in, handwriting that no one can barely read, versus a QME report who lists out all your medical history, who has paragraph after paragraph after a thorough medical discussion about what's going on with you and why their opinion is what it is. Like, yeah, of course, the QME report's going to be considered a better, more reliable report than the report from your treating physician. So it just depends.
What are some of the common mistakes that that workers make when they're seeking these second opinions? What are some of the things you've seen besides doctor shopping?
One of the biggest mistakes I see is that we will send a person to a doctor that we know is going to give them the benefit of the doubt, who's going to kind of be the best option they have, and they're not happy with that doctor and they want to go to someone else, and maybe the other options aren't even as good. They're just not happy with the current option. And I think the frustrating part about workers' comp is sometimes it's not a one size fits all, and probably in most instances not going to feel like you have the best care all the time with the exact doctor you want, where you want, when you want, and I think a lot of times people are always kind of hoping that the grass is greener. And when you constantly switch doctors, it's like, well, if I just try someone else, maybe they'll be better. If I just try someone else, maybe they'll be better. And I think knowing how much workers' comp is a system is horrible. I see people making that mistake of wanting to try to keep trying something else and thinking that the grass is always going to be greener when they change, and it's not. And so I think that's a common mistake, is kind of, thinking that it's going to be better and complicating your case and your care by trying to change all the time, or even just once, depending on where you're at in your case. And also too, not being open to change. There's some people who also don't want to change their doctor, and we see them wanting to stick with a particular facility or a particular doctor that we know isn't going to be the best for them. And so they'll be afraid of the change and they don't want the change. So, it cuts both ways, I think.
In general, people are afraid of change, right? And I think you mentioned something earlier that really stuck out to me, and that was people not accepting their reality, not accepting what they're currently facing, right? So because they're not hearing what they want from one doctor, they might feel the need to change doctors, thinking that this next doctor is going to feed them what they want to hear, when in reality, that might not be the case, right? Which essentially goes to what you were just explaining right now. And it's just a scary situation, not knowing what you're going to dive yourself into. Is this going to be a better option, or is it going to be a worse option? I think if you're in a situation where you're trying to get second opinions and it's regarding your medical treatment, then I would highly recommend not to figure this out on your own. Know that there are people that do this for a living. It is their career choice and they are the experts. And this is the part where I would highly suggest, again, not taking it on your own, and instead seeking someone that could also guide you through this, because these can be very difficult situations and different outcomes, either for the better or for the worse. And if it was for the worse, you want to know that someone would be in your team. You mentioned earlier as well, Bilal, second opinions in judges. Talk to me about what that means, because that sounded juicy. Like, what? If a judge says something, I'm entitled to a second opinion? Like, please explain.
Sort of. Sometimes we get assigned judges to trials and things like that. And there's judges, if there's a judge listening to this, I'm sorry, but there are judges that have certain strengths and weaknesses, just like anyone else. There are some judges that are, I would say, more, I guess, nerdy. And by nerdy, I mean like they really love the intricacies of the law. They love the details. They love digging into cases and interpreting the legislature's intent to a minutia. There's judges that really love that. There's other judges that love to see people work out whatever problem it is that they have between each other without taking up the court's time and setting a trial on the issue. They love to be problem solvers in a very practical sense, and they don't want you to go to trial. They want you to resolve the dispute. And so there's judges that have their strengths in different ways and stuff. And so, a lot of times we don't get to pick who that judge is that's assigned to the case we have. And, maybe there's a particular person that is very principled, and regardless of how big or small their issue is, they want to win. And that particular stance may not work well with what's going on in their case or which judge is assigned to the case, versus someone who's more amenable to working out the issue, who doesn't need 100% of the pie. They are happy with 80% of the pie. And so maybe they're better suited with a judge that's going to help parties mediate whatever the issue is and get the problem resolved and get the case moving. And so to some extent, there's people who can be unhappy with the judges that is assigned, or the decision that the judge makes, or the position of the judge trying to mediate the issues that are occurring before the court. And so to some extent, people want to know, like, hey, what happens when I disagree with this judge? Do I get to pick another judge? Do I get to have someone else look at their decision? And the general answer is yes. We have an appeals process in workers' comp. There's two different types of appeals, really, when you think about it. There's what's called a removal, and there's also a recon. A removal is where the judge has done something to your case that's not a final order. Maybe maybe they took your case off calendar when you really wanted it set for trial, or they said they weren't going to rule on something that you filed, a petition or a motion. They kicked it down the road or something. A recon is when you actually have a final order where the judge issues a decision on a case. Most cases, if you're appealing, it would negatively impact you. Like they said, your injury did not happen at work because you were on break, or the QMEs report is more substantial medical evidence, so your disability rating is 20% instead of 40%, things like that. So you do get that opportunity to appeal decisions. You can, in some sense, appeal which judge is assigned to your case. When we get cases set for trial, we have a right to preemptory challenge a judge. So if the first assigned judge isn't a judge we think we want on that particular issue, we can say that we want to challenge that assignment and we get automatic reassignment to another judge. And both parties have the right to do that as well.
Interesting.
There are ways to, I guess, get a second opinion depending on what you're talking about.
That's a lot to dive into. I mean, second opinions are a thing in workers' comp, and obviously this isn't something that someone would automatically know coming in first time to a claim injury. It's a system that is very complex, but knowing this information now gives you hope that when things are not working out the way that they should be, there are options that you can take and things that you can do. Is there anything else, Paul, that you'd like to share in regards to second opinions in workers' comp?
I just think in general, second opinions, whether we're talking about your treating physician or a judge, are all very tactical decisions that you should make thoughtfully. Nothing you want to rush into. Sometimes a challenge isn't always the best path forward. I think if you're not really sure what you're doing, the second opinions can be just as good for your case, if not worse. So there's definitely upsides and downsides, and you should be careful when you're thinking about it and make sure you're making the right decision.
Yeah, we'll definitely get an attorney to get that help going and get things moving. But if someone feels that they don't want to get an attorney because they're either misinformed, thinking that they have to pay out of pocket, which is not true. In workers' comp, you don't pay an attorney. It's based on a contingency fee, which means the attorney gets part of your settlement at the end if you win. That's if you win. Where else can people seek information?
If you look on the DWC website, you can Google stuff. You can check out on our blog on Pacific Workers. You can watch some of our fabulous YouTube videos. Or, you just call a lawyer and ask questions. Lawyers would be happy to talk to you and answer questions. Even if you don't want to sign up with them, they can help you find your place on the map and give you some insight. If nothing else, just a conversation always helps.
And don't compare your case to someone else's. Everyone's case is different. It's very important to also note. Well, that is amazing. I learned a lot today, and I hope that you did too. If you haven't subscribed to our channel on YouTube, make sure you do so now. That way you get updates when we upload new content. If you're not following us on social media, what are you doing? Follow us on Pacific Workers' social media. You can find us everywhere under Pacific Workers. We do share a lot of blogs. We do share a lot of information, a lot of other different videos that are not part of the podcast, and vice versa. So if you know someone that might benefit from this, share the news, share the information, and we hope to see you guys on the next episode of Work Comp Talk.